We're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. So today is the 18th of August, and Zelensky, according to information we have, is going to visit the capital of the United States of America, Washington, with the purpose to have a meeting with the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, where Zelensky will be forced to make a very important decision, probably the most important decision of his life, whether to accept the agreements that were reached by the Russians and by the Americans on the summit on the territory of Alaska, or to reject them. But telling the truth, and based on updates that we were receiving during the previous hours, during the previous night from Western countries, from Ukrainian resources, we believe that Zelensky most likely would reject this proposal, and he prefers to continue the special military operation in the war with the Russian Federation. Because during the previous 12 hours, lots of pro-Ukrainian sources published lots of very interesting articles that says just one thing, that the war is not so bad, the war is not so terrible, the situation is not so bad, and that the armed force of Ukraine is doing a great job. For example, this article was published by pro-Ukrainian analysts. They stated that over the past 1,010 days of war, the Russian armed forces have occupied less than 1% of the territory of Ukraine. Starting from November 12, 2022, this is the moment when the Ukrainian Kharkiv counteroffensive ended, to today, the Russian armed forces have occupied just 5,842 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. This is less than 1% of the entire area of the Ukrainian state within international recognized borders. So within borders of 1991. So this is the first article that was published by Ukrainians and was discussed by probably every single expert. Later, we got another article published also by pro-Ukrainian resource, and according to this article, we can see new Ukrainian missile, and according to information we have, this is a missile of Flamingo, and Ukrainians are saying that the range of this missile is declared up to 3,000 kilometers, and this is the most, let's say, longest missile that Ukrainians have created since the beginning of the special military operation. And by this article, the Ukrainians are trying to tell us, the sources are trying to tell us that the most interesting, the most important, the most exciting period of war with the Russian Federation is just ahead of us, when we Ukrainians will begin massive production of these missiles, and we Ukrainians will begin attacking deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, especially the cities of Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, and many other military objects and facilities. So the Ukrainians are trying to tell us, just wait a bit more and you will see everything. And of course, the statements of Zelensky himself, he says that the constitution makes this impossible. Zelensky categorically refused to cede any territories of Ukraine. So as you can see, we received hundreds of articles from different pro-Ukrainian sources that excuse possible rejection of Zelensky of agreement that was reached by the Russians and by the Americans. And we haven't received even a single article, even a single statement from pro-Ukrainian side that Zelensky must accept this proposal, because most likely he will not get any better. And of course, the Western countries joined this rally. And for example, on the 17th of August was very interesting virtual meeting between leaders of France and United Kingdom and other different countries of Coalition of the Willings, and they stated that Coalition of the Willing announced its readiness to deploy troops to Ukraine after the ceasefire. And this is very important because we know that according to the United States of America and the Russian Federation, they found a solution how to guarantee security for Ukraine just between them, between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, and they don't want to see anyone else in this process. But the Coalition of Willing is telling us that if and as soon as ceasefire comes or starts, we will send forces despite any agreements, any talks, and any negotiations between the Russian Federation and the United States of America, which obviously will lead to automatically launch another war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So we see that Ukraine, the Western countries, mainly European countries, are not ready to stop the special military operation. They want to continue. But despite their willingness, despite the fact that the Russians reduced their demands, despite attempts from the President of Trump to finish to peacefully settlement the conflict, everything right now depends on Zelensky. But something tells me that most likely the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, will reject any proposal from the United States of America. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously, the next 24 hours are going to be very and very interesting. Now let's return back to Ukraine and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And very interesting report we got during the previous night. The Russians launched another massive missile and drone strike, mainly in the eastern and in the southern part of Ukraine. The sources are saying that the Russians with the Iskander missiles attacked the cities of Kharkiv, the city of Sumy, and the city of Pavlograd. So all these settlements were attacked where Ukrainians were concentrating and accumulating their forces before possible offensives or counter-offensive operations. And today, this morning more precisely, we got this video where we can see let's say the building on the territory of the city of Kharkiv that was damaged. Let's say the top floors were damaged with Russian ground drones. So the entire let's say the last two blocks of the building were completely destroyed. Most likely the entire building will be destroyed and reduced by Ukrainian authorities of the city in coming days. So this is, for example, the first picture of consequences of Russian attack. Another wave of attack took place in the southern part, and this time the Russians were attacking the city of Odessa. In the Odessa, after Russian drone strike, fires broke out at a Novopochta facility and soccer fuel terminals. So when talking about soccer fuel terminals, this is a company that has connections with the state of Azerbaijan. So they have routes that go exactly there. So the Russians damaged some very important facilities. Most likely the Ukrainians were planning to use Novopochta, the post office, let's say deliveries, to bring additional parts or something like this to attack later the territory of Crimea or in this direction of the southern part with drones and missiles. But the Russians destroyed this post office. Now let's discuss the situation along the current line of combat contact. This morning, the head of Ukrainian army, Syrsky, made lots of statements regarding the situation. And since Syrsky confirmed that Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in the Sumy direction collapsed completely, that Ukrainians were defeated without any chances and without almost any results of restoring control over the territories of the Sumy Oblast. Also, Syrsky added that these coming days he is waiting, or months or weeks, he is waiting for additional batch of robotic systems. 50,000 robots will come to Ukraine that Ukrainians most likely will use to replace with them the stormtroopers and soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. Also, Syrsky added that the Russians are planning to launch another major or full-scale offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. So something big, Syrsky is expecting these days, is going to happen in this area. Most likely, if Zelensky rejects the proposal of Trump, the Russians will start offensive. Of course, first the Russians will attack the entire territory of Ukraine with drones and missiles. They managed to accumulate thousands of them, and then the Russians will begin offensive. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. We have additional changes on the ground. First of all, the Russians managed to restore control or counterattack the Ukrainians and to restore control of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. This village was colored in Ukrainian favor yesterday according to different neutral mappers, and today the same neutral mappers restored these territories back under complete Russian control. So based on these reports, as you can see, we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor or marked this territory as a contested area. Furthermore, several neutral mappers reported that the Russians, by the morning of the 18th of August of 2025, managed to take under complete control the settlement of Kucherov Yar, so very important village that will allow the Russians now to stabilize this flank and to concentrate their attention completely on the southeastern direction with the purpose to take the villages along the river of by the name of Казённый Торец. We're talking about Vladimirovka, Shakhovka, Sofiyevka, and Toretskaya. Without taking these villages under control, the Russians have no chances to advance further in this direction. The Ukrainian sources published video from the settlement of Zolotoy Kolodez that, according to different sources, 5 days ago was under complete control of the armed force of the Russian Federation. Here we can see Ukrainians that were located in the central part of the settlement with the Ukrainian flag and with the flag of the 79th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And based on this video, we haven't colored everything, as you can see, because these territories were colored yesterday, according to statements and articles published by different sources. Very interesting videos coming from the settlement of Veselaya. I would like to point your attention once again, because this is exactly what the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, was talking about. This is probably very unique and very interesting counter-offensive operation carried out by the Ukrainians, because according to information in Ukraine, we have the Ukrainians didn't use troopers to clear the settlement. The Ukrainians used tanks and robots. So in this video, in this moment, we can see several robots that answered the settlement of Veselaya and were attacking Russian positions. So this is a unique operation when the entire settlement, not unique, probably we saw several types of these operations in the past, but when talking about the Donetsk direction, this is probably the first unique operation when Ukrainians restore control over another village just with robots and tanks. And this is exactly what Syrsky was talking about. He is waiting for another 15,000 robots in coming days or coming months. According to him, this will replace Ukrainian soldiers on the ground and will, of course, reduce losses. So we see that Ukrainians are moving further and further deep inside of technological, probably, superiority against Russia. But obviously, the Russians will do the same if they see that this situation works. Now let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 12 hours, lots of independent resources reported that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to break through Ukrainian defense and to enter the southeastern part of the settlement of Konstantinovka. Also, from the side of Pritiechina, in the area of the 6th Motorized Rifle Division, the fighters entered the administrative borders of Konstantinovka. Later, another source confirmed that there are unconfirmed reports that Russian forces entered the city limits of Konstantinovka and have established a foothold in the eastern residential areas. Reports state that they came from Pritiechina and that reinforcements are arriving. So, summarizing everything, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to answer this part of the city, which will obviously in the end lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian positions to the south of this part of the city. So we are talking about the villages of Kleban-Bykny, Lipovka, Plesheyevka, Ivanopol, Alexandra Shultina. Without the southern and the southeastern part of Konstantinovka, Ukrainians in this area have no chances to hold their positions under the pressure of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Once again, if this information is true, then most likely Ukrainians today will try to counterattack, but most likely they will try to probably prepare evacuation roads to save their soldiers and personnel, and of course vehicles and tanks. Now let's talk about the Liman direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Serebryanka. So this is how exactly how the map changed during the previous days. Currently, the village is already colored completely in Russian favor, according to different sources. The Ukrainians, according to the same sources, currently trying to evacuate their soldiers from the Serebryanka forest further in the western direction to get as close as possible to the settlement of Yampol, and most likely to try to hold the lines along the rivers of Zherebets and the river of Seversky Donets. Most likely in coming days, Ukrainians will lose complete control over the entire Serebryanka forest, and the Russians will have everything they need to begin their full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the city by the name of Seversk, which is very important stronghold on the eastern flank of the entire or of the rest of Donbass probably line of the armed forces of Ukraine. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.